If you've been around personal finance for any length of time, then you've probably heard of Dave Ramsey, who's a very influential figure over in the US who runs The Ramsey Show. Dave's baby steps have helped millions and millions of people improve their financial situation over the years. And yet still there are people who don't really like this method and who don't like Dave. But why? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about things related to the baby steps that will help you understand why you maybe think it's not the best method, why you maybe think it's outdated, and why you think that it doesn't make mathematical sense. So let's get into the video. Welcome to Millennials of Money. My name is Johnny. Thank you for joining me for this video. Let's get this money. So probably a good starting point in this video is laying out what are the baby steps. So there are 7 baby steps in Dave Ramsey's method to financial peace. So baby step number 1 is to have $1,000 on hand as an emergency fund to tackle any emergencies that come your way. Baby step number 2 is to pay off all debt in your name with the exception of the mortgage, starting with the debt with the lowest interest rate first. This is called the snowball method. Baby step 3 is to expand that $1,000 emergency fund into a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. Now, it may be more, maybe less, depending on your monthly expenses and your financial situation. Whether you're, a freelancer or if you have a stable job, that might determine how much money you have in that emergency fund. Baby step number 4 is to invest 15% of your income into retirement. Now in the US, this would likely be in a 401k or a Roth IRA. In other countries, you'd perhaps put it in a pension fund or in an ISA, perhaps in the UK. I would adapt this step maybe depending on the country because, the baby steps was designed with US people in mind. Baby step number 5 is to save money for your children's college fund. Baby step number 6 is to pay off your home early. And baby step number 7 is to continue building your wealth and be generous and give to others. So sounds like a pretty solid financial plan, right? I mean, we got some nice principles in there, paying off debt, investing, planning for the future, but there's still people who don't like the method and they don't like particular things about the method. So what I'm going to do now is explain some important things that you need to know about the baby steps, which have pretty much laid the groundwork for them. Because there's a lot of people who still do use credit cards but are responsible with money. And there's a lot of people who would maybe say use the avalanche method in paying off debt, which is to pay off the highest rate of interest first. There's people who would maybe say, yeah, but I want to use debt to buy real estate and leverage. And many people make valid points. I really like Dave Ramsey, but I still use a credit card myself. So why is the baby step set up this way? And why is it so strict on certain points? Well, let's get into it right now. So the first thing you gotta understand is that part of the reason that Dave advocates so strongly against debt is because he had a bad experience in the past. So Dave came up as a real estate agent and investor. He took out a lot of debt to leverage and to build wealth, and he had a pretty big portfolio back in his early days. What happened was the banks that gave him the loans got bought out, and the banks that took on the loans wanted him to pay up immediately, and that essentially left him unable to pay and he went bankrupt. So it's a pretty horrible experience to go through being bankrupt and you worked so hard to build a real estate empire for it to be taken away like that. I mean, you can understand in a sense why Dave would advocate so strongly against debt. The second thing I want to talk about is the claims that people make about the method being outdated. Keep in mind the baby steps were designed in the 80s or the 90s and that $1,000 amount hasn't changed at all. But of course, when we take into account inflation, then $1,000 today won't have bought as much as it bought back in the 80s or the 90s. In fact, if you look at the purchasing power of $1,000 back then, it would have around the same purchasing power today as $3,000 today. Another criticism that people often have about the method is its inflexibility. So regardless of your situation, whether you're making $100,000 a year, whether you're making $50,000 a year, whether you have several children, whether you have different goals, the baby steps are the baby steps according to Dave, and that they should be applied to everybody in the same order, no matter your situation. Equally, even though the method was designed for the US, that's to say that you would still apply the same method if you're living in another country, which, if you think about UK and student debt, for example, which would fall under baby step 2, that would mean, in theory, you would have to pay off all your student debt in advance. When those of us that have studied in the UK, we know that the student loan system in the UK works quite differently to the US, and that it perhaps doesn't make sense to pay it off. But under the Ramsey method, that student loan debt would have to be paid off. Now, another criticism that I've heard about this system, and probably one of the most frequent ones, is that the Ramsey method doesn't make mathematical sense. For example, there you see the baby step of pay off the mortgage early. If you've got a mortgage with an interest rate of, let's say, less than 5%, and you're getting 10% annual returns on your investment, then you would ask yourself, why not invest my money when I get a higher return than the interest I'm saving by paying down my mortgage early? To further add to this, another show that I watch called The Money Guy Show, they've shown graphically that it makes more mathematical sense to invest and just pay off your mortgage over time rather than pay it all off. Another example of this would be real estate investing. Now, Dave loves real estate. He comes from real estate, but he never recommends his listeners, his followers, to take out another mortgage to get an investment property. For your main home, sure, that's the one exception he has to the debt rule, is a mortgage for your primary residence. But for investment properties, he says no, he recommends that you buy it in cash. And so by following the Ramsey method, there's not a lot of people who'd be able to buy investment real estate because they simply wouldn't be able to pay for it in cash. Whether you believe it makes more financial sense to invest rather than pay off debt, or to take out a mortgage on an investment property and use leverage, that's not Dave's approach. And the reason why is because the baby steps method is focused on behavioral finance rather than making mathematical sense. Whether it does make more financial sense to invest rather than pay off debt, or to take out a mortgage for an investment property or not, the baby steps is not about making mathematical sense. The baby steps is about behavioral finance. Dave's method is all about financial peace and debt freedom, and advocating that and good financial habits over mathematics and maximizing, the return on your investment through leveraging debt or something like that. And that brings me on to the next point, which is that the baby steps are low risk. So not only in the sense of paying off debt over investing, not using credit cards, not leveraging to invest, but also in terms of the actual investing approach. So when it comes to investing, Dave recommends 4 different high performing mutual funds. He does not recommend individual stocks. He definitely doesn't recommend crypto. He sticks with those mutual funds. And yes, there's maybe higher returns to be had out there from crypto, from individual stocks, but this is Dave's method. He sticks with low risk as possible. You can almost call it boring if you want, because it's not very exciting to invest in index funds, but I've talked about it on this channel. Investing shouldn't be exciting. It should be a bit boring, and it should just be a slow wealth building game. And the final point I want to talk about in this video kind of brings all the prior points together and also helps you to understand further why the baby steps are set up where they are. And that's because of Dave's faith as a Christian. Now, whether you're a person of faith or not, it is worth knowing that the Bible and the Christian faith does strongly influence a lot of these principles. For example, you'll hear Dave on his show quote a lot a verse from Proverbs, which talks about the borrower is slave to the lender. And that can be interpreted essentially as when you have a debt to someone else, they have a certain sense of power or control over you. And Dave wants you to be free from that. He doesn't want you to feel like you're in debt to someone or someone else exerts power over you in that sense. Another biblical principle that influences the baby steps is generosity. So in the Bible, it talks about how the world of the generous gets bigger and bigger. And you can see that in baby step 5 and baby step 7, they're focused on others rather than yourself, focused on building your kids' college fund and being able to give to others. And if you look elsewhere in the Bible, there's actually a lot of verses that talk about money as well and being a good steward of money. So Dave interprets being a good steward of money as not taking excessive risk, paying off your debts, paying off what you owe to others, and not, gambling or doing stupid stuff with your money, essentially. Keep in mind that these are principles in the Bible. They're not rules, they're guidelines to help you be a good manager, be a good steward of your money, as the Bible talks about. But, Dave is a person of faith who's been through a lot on his walk. Understandably would want to have those Christian principles integrated in his method, even if they don't make the most mathematical sense. This is through his experience, through his journey, what he wants to teach others. So with all that said, my thoughts on the baby steps and the Ramsey method are as follows. I think it's a good system. There are some really good principles in here that will help you develop good financial habits, whether it's paying off your debts on time, whether it's making sure you regularly invest, whether it's having goals for the future. As I highlighted earlier in the video, it doesn't always make mathematical sense. Therefore, the Ramsey method, yes, you'll build wealth over time, but you're not going to become rich, I don't think. But you will have a sense of financial peace peace and debt freedom, which is also something very valuable to have. So that's what it all comes down to for me. Yeah, sure, you can build wealth and build more wealth perhaps using other methods other than the Ramsey method, but the Ramsey method, you know, it offers that financial peace and debt freedom through that approach. I mean, me personally, I'm what's known as Dave-ish. You know, I like his principles, I like his method, but I still have, you know, I still use credit cards. I pay them off at the end of every month. I'm not fully against all methods of debt, and I will probably not pay off my mortgage early. I would probably invest because I have such a low interest rate. What I actually tend to follow is a channel called The Money Guy Show. It's very similar actually to Dave's method. It does have a lot of the same principles, but it is more focused on maximizing wealth building opportunities and doing a bit more of what makes mathematical sense. So I find The Money Guy Show a bit like the best of both worlds. You have the good sound financial habits, financial principles, but you also have the teaching that helps you maximize your wealth building opportunities. Hope you found this video helpful, guys. Leave a comment and let me know, what do you think of the baby steps? Now, why not check out my other videos? And if you like this one and you're not yet subscribed, then make sure you hit the subscribe button with the notification bell so you don't miss a single update. I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money step by step.